I'm going to get down to it, and I'm going to tell you the truth about Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We ain't pulling no punches. I'm going to do it right here today on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day, and this is the Locked On Jaguars podcast. I am Tony Wiggins, your host of said podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen. You can hear us and see us both over on our YouTube page. That is Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you tap in every single day. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and then hit that bell so you get notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And then when you're listening to podcasts, because you can't watch, make sure you do it on the platform that you do it on every single day, and check in to make sure you don't miss an episode of Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored by FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Shout out to the everydayers for joining me here every single day. We appreciate you, and you can be an everydayer too. All you got to do is join us every single day. All right, we're going to get down to it. By the time this show ends, I'm going to tell you why perception is fighting reality in real time, right in front of everybody's faces when it comes to not just Trevor Lawrence, but that's who we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Trevor Lawrence. In segment two things can be true at one time. Believe it or not, that is actually something that is a fact, that two things can be true at one time. And I'll give you an example of it involving basketball, right? Since that's what so many people are talking about today. And we're going to start with the truth about Trevor Lawrence. So I'm going to tell you what motivated this. What motivated this is all of the talk about Caitlin Clark. And what motivated this is also was Trevor Lawrence stood up yesterday at OTAs and said, he kind of hopes that things get done. It sounds like a deal is super imminent between Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this is where we break this down, because I saw comments yesterday from a podcast where Greg Cosell, longtime NFL analyst who I really like and respect, basically said that, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. He says that you can go check it out. He says that maybe expectations need to be pulled back a little bit. By who? I don't know who's going to pull the expectations back. I don't know if the organization is going to do that and then pay him simultaneously. And then I don't think the fans at this point are capable of doing it, because they've actually thought a certain way for so long. And that's where we're going to start. Has Trevor Lawrence lived up to the hype? No, he has not. Period. Point blank. Has Trevor Lawrence been as good as Jaguar fans thought he was? No, he has not. He hasn't. Has Trevor Lawrence been as good as we all figured he would be? No. But that's not Trevor Lawrence's fault, because what we thought and what we figured wasn't his problem. And those things, in my opinion, were blown way out of proportion. I'm going to give you some examples. There are people that actually felt like Trevor Lawrence at this point would be in the same breath as Patrick Mahomes. At the very least, thought of in the same breath as Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen. That's just not true. There are people debating whether he is a top 6 quarterback or is he between 6 and 8. And some people debating whether he's a top dozen, which is fine, okay? In terms of, that's a guy you can win with. Top 12 quarterbacks usually should be in the playoffs every year, right? If you build a team around them enough, then they'll do enough things that individually that you can start saying that, okay, this guy is top 5 or top 6 because of his intangibles, because of his leadership and all of that stuff. The GOAT was a dude and Tom Brady, he was a dude that took 7 years for people to start talking about him like this. And that's the problem. I just think it's us having to be right. And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but we all have to say things in hyperbole. We don't have to, but for the most part, people feel like that's the way that sports is these days. You gotta make a statement, man. You can't ride the fence. You got to say something profound. And when you say something profound, sometimes you sound like an idiot if it never comes true. And I think Trevor Lawrence himself has done a whole bunch of things right. He's done a whole bunch of things right. I think the organization, to a certain degree, has failed him up to a certain point. And I think what bothers people, and this is the real thing about all of this. We can have disagreement about that opinion, but what bothers folks is not that a person like Greg Cosell is actually saying the same thing that you as a fan believes, but it's just because you're here every day and the people that are here every day covering the team, they don't want to see some dude that you perceive or that you think isn't covering the team every day talking without nuance about what's going on with your football team. Because when you blame all of these things on Trevor, I will come back and say, no, we need to blame some of this on us for what our expectations were, for thinking that it was going to happen really, really fast and really, really quick, and that he was going to be one of the best players in the league. See, we allow our enthusiasm, our hope, and our optimism to get in the way of our logic and our practicality. And that's not his fault. That's also not some dude, Greg Cosell or whoever's fault. Some of that falls on us. Some of that falls on us. And a lot of it should fall on the team. Two things can be right at the same time, and we'll talk about that in segment 2. There are things that he has to fix, but you don't want to hear none of that from people that don't cover the team every single day, because it will lack the nuance and the understanding. It's like, yeah, you know that, but how do you know? We know that, but you don't. How do you know that? Because you think that those people are making these statements to justify statements that they made before all of this happened. You don't trust them. You also think that there are a bunch of people that are piling on and they always talk negatively about Jacksonville. Possibly all of that stuff could possibly be true. But you know what else could possibly be true? The thing that they're actually saying could possibly be true. And it is. He is not as good as y'all thought he was going to be. And that's okay, because maybe we were wrong to try to think that he was going to be something. So this is the thing that I kind of want to explain here, and you can use this for sports or anything else. It's hard to explain to people who, when they grew up as kids, we grew up outside. We grew up outside. Matter of fact, if you come in, you were in for the day. So we stayed outside and we drank out of a water hose and we got dirty and we were hungry and we crashed and went to sleep because we were tired because we used all our energy. It's hard to talk to kids that didn't grow up like that. They grew up with video games inside of the house and wonder why they can't sleep, because you ain't done nothing to make yourself tired. It is very, very difficult for us to have those discussions. So it's also difficult to have discussions with people that have expectations that they've set their own table with what they think should happen. And then in sports, they sit and wait for that thing to happen, or try to curb competition with words and narratives to make sure that the thing you wanted to happen happens the way that you wanted it to. Like Trevor Lawrence being great, like Caitlin Clark being the best player in the WNBA, which she isn't. I'm sorry your expectations aren't met, but sometimes other people are correct. And sometimes those people need to be doing a better job and be more nuanced at explaining their position. So here's I'm going to explain my position. I think Trevor Lawrence is better than a lot of people think he is. I also think that Trevor Lawrence isn't as good as a lot of people thought he was going to be. I think he has earned a contract extension. That doesn't mean that he's lived up to expectations. All of these things can be mutually exclusive. They don't all have to line up and jive for us to have a correct decision about anything. If I ask you something privately and you go, yeah, I agree, but then publicly you get mad at somebody else that says the same thing, well, you probably need to look in the mirror and realize who the problem is. It's not the people that's saying it. It's the one that's not mature enough to separate your feelings and take the feelings out of it and admit when something is true. But I also believe that I know why. I think there's a lot of things he could do differently. And then I think there's a lot of things that they could do for him to help him. It's okay that the dude ain't Superman or the next coming of Patrick Mahomes or whoever. That's fine. Let him be who he is and let the results. I'm going to show you. I'm going to use a situation in the past, and then I'm going to come up in segment 2, and I'm going to show you how the greatest who ever did it, how his career started, and why he was able to function the way that he was able to function. I'm going to do all of that in just a second here as we continue to talk about Trevor Lawrence on Locked On Jaguars. I want to let you know about Game Time, man. If you're sitting around procrastinating, not able to get tickets, or maybe you're just waiting to get your paycheck, man, I get it. We ain't rich. I understand how it works. And you have to buy those tickets to that concert, sporting event, play, whatever it is. You got to buy them at the last minute. Well, normally people tell you stuff like your lack of planning does not create an emergency for me, but that's not the way Game Time works. Game Time actually focuses on last minute deals. That's right. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. with Game Time. All you got to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, segment 2 here on Locked On Jaguars with your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. I like Trevor Lawrence. I like Trevor Lawrence as a football player. I really, really do. So let's break this down with football first. Are there things that he could do differently? Yeah, I sit up there in the press box and watch games, and I actually hear longtime people say, why did he do that? One of the things that I want Trevor to do is protect the football. And that means when you're throwing it and when you're holding it and carrying it, you have to protect the football. You cannot be a winner and lead the league in turnovers since you've been in the league. That just doesn't happen. And everybody will agree with that. I don't think he has an interception problem. I think he has a take the easy play problem. There are too many times on 3rd and 5 where Trevor will go down the field 41 yards or 27 yards, and there'll be a dude right on the other side of the field in the flat wide open. He could have just got that first down. You don't have to play the game and trying to prove. I don't know if this is the case, but it seems like sometimes he gets to the point where he wants to show how nice he is. He wants to show how good he is, and he trusts his arm. And those things are good to have. But sometimes those routine plays, those are the layups that I talk about. You got to make things easy for yourself, and sometimes you got to make things easy by taking the easy thing and just getting that first down. So there are times when that happens that it drives me crazy. But see, that goes to a Doug issue, because Doug also on 4th and inches or 2nd and inches, he'll throw it 3 straight times and turn the ball over on downs. They won't try to run because maybe he knows he can't, but at least you have to try, right? You have to will yourself. So I think Trevor Lawrence's biggest thing that he needs to improve, other than turnovers, not necessarily interceptions, but the turnovers, I think the thing that he needs to improve on is just having a sense of the feel for that moment when you don't need more. All you do is you just need to do what's required. And the good quarterbacks are able to manage that, and then every now and then show what that arm is supposed to be and what that arm does. That being said, when you look at just numbers, Trevor Lawrence has a pretty good start to his career when you want to compare it to Peyton Manning and you want to compare it to Tom Brady. I looked at Tom Brady's stats this morning. Now, I'm going to tell you something. They won a Super Bowl. When they won that Super Bowl and he took over as the starter, his stats in that game, they didn't win that game because of him. They won that game because he managed it. They ran it. The defense played well when they upset the greatest show on turf, the St. Louis Rams at the time. And then the following year, he completed 64% of his passes for 18 touchdowns and 12 picks. And then the year after that, 28 touchdowns and 14 picks. So in his first 2 full years as a starter, Tom Brady had 46 touchdowns and 26 interceptions. And his quarterback rating was hanging right around 86. When you look up Trevor Lawrence's numbers, let's just say his first let's look at his first season. We're going to include the Urban Meyer year. We're not going to conveniently just not include the Urban Meyer year. We just can't do it, right? So when you look at it, his stats over his career, The way that they break this down is break it down in the regular season. He's right there at 65% completion percentage, right? His quarterback rating is 88, and he has 58 touchdowns and 39 interceptions. So if you average that out, and all 3 years are kind of averaged out to be the same, it's about 19 touchdowns. We will give him 38 over 2 years. Those interceptions is about 13. So you're looking at 19 and 13 basically as an average. And pretty much that's kind of right there with Brady. And the completion percentage has been at about 64%. But the difference is now, the difference is this: expectations. Because no one had expectations for a 6th-round pick. They have expectations for a 1st-round pick. That does not physically change what goes on the field and how we look at it and view it. It only changes what we feel about it, because our perception and reality are two different things. When there are high expectations of a 1st-round draft pick, you hold them to a higher standard because you want it to look a certain way. But then when a 6th-round draft pick and he's just able to function and go about and move about his business because those expectations are high. Now, what we feel has no impact, has zero impact on what's going on the field. That just has an impact of how we view it and how we see it. Trevor Lawrence, for all intents and purposes, I just compared him to Tom Brady, who's the greatest of all time, and nobody thought great. And I'm not telling you that I think Trevor's going to be the GOAT. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is this: is he really playing that poorly? As if some people that have suggested that he doesn't even need a contract extension? Absolutely not. He's not playing that poorly. Answer this question. Is he really playing as good as you thought that he would when the Jaguars secured the 1st overall pick? No. And it's okay. It's all right. There's nothing wrong with it. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve a contract extension, because he does. He's earned it, relatively speaking. You may go see a house if you're in the market. You don't like the house. You ain't going to change the price because you don't like it. Somebody will. And if the other people in the neighborhood's houses have the same value, well, that's what the going price is. It doesn't matter about personal preference and personal, what we're thinking personally. I'm going to give you an example of how people can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. Isaiah Thomas said something years ago about Larry Bird. Says if Larry Bird was black, he'd just be another player. That the white media was blowing all of this Larry Bird stuff up. Now, follow me here. I agree and disagree with Isaiah Thomas. First of all, I think he was wrong. Larry Bird wasn't just no ordinary dude. There wasn't a whole bunch of Larry Birds walking around. It was one. Okay, so Larry Bird was great. I hated him. I rooted against him. But I'm the biggest Bird defender of all time right now, because he's one of my 5 favorite players of all time, because I respected him and I respected what he did. But at the time, did the media blow it up? And did they Tebow it and stuff it all in your face every chance they get? You damn right they did. Two things can be the same at one time. Doesn't mean the media created Larry Bird, and it also doesn't mean that Larry Bird benefited from the media. But what it does mean is there's a such thing that two things can be right at the same time. Larry Bird can be great. Isaiah Thomas can be wrong about the fact that he didn't think Larry Bird was that great, but that's just that competitor in him. But he can also be right that even though he was great, that they were smashing him in our face every single chance we get. There's a reason Dr. Dre, when he heard Eminem say, go find him. I want to sign him. I love his music. I love his sound. I love the way he raps. And then when Eminem walked into his office, Dr. Dre said jackpot, because he knew the way he looked would make it even more famous. But it's okay to say that Eminem is great. I don't think he's the greatest rapper of all time, but he was the most marketable rapper of all time, and that has nothing to do with me, and has nothing to do with you. It just has something to do with people that connect to something. So now we're going to push this and say, what does that have to do with Trevor Lawrence? Well, I can say that two things are true at the same time. He hasn't lived up to the expectations of fans and media and all of the hype, but he has been good enough to get a contract extension, and one thing should not determine the other. That's it. Perception fighting reality. We're going to get into that in the third and final segment of Locked On Jaguars, but I got to let you know about Locked On Sports today, man. If you're watching Fox Sports and ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for your everyday needs and to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to talk more about Trevor Lawrence, and then we're going to talk about how perception and reality are two different things. And somehow we just continue to get them confused when we're talking about sports. We'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. FanDuel, man, it is the absolute truth, and things are starting to get tight in the NHL and in the NBA, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Load management now because it's all for everything in the finals in both of those leagues. It's all about the best players stepping up to do their thing. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We are here on Locked On Jaguars in the third and final segment. We talked about the truth about Trevor Lawrence. Two things can be true at one time, and now we'll just go through this whole perception versus reality thing. We ain't always got to be right. We ain't always got to know everything about everything. All right. And I think sometimes when we look at sports and we're here every single day and we're pouring our hearts into it and we're invested in one particular team, the last thing somebody wants is an argument from somebody that's outside of that sphere and making comments as if they are an authority, right? Even if that person is right, you ain't going to listen to them because you kind of shut them down because you think their opinion is coming from a place that isn't very genuine. They're just trying to prove themselves right. And a lot of times that is exactly what's happening. Just make sure we continue to understand that when we watch these games and we watch sports, that these are actually real living people out here doing the absolute best they can to try to help their team, to make as much money as they can, to live their dreams. Sometimes we get caught up in it and we look at it and we thinking of it as if it's like fantasy football. And that's just not the case. The opinion of somebody in the media, man, the only thing that does is change the way maybe some people look at certain things or some people perceive certain things. Stats don't sit here and tell you all of the nuances and all of the things that make players great. You can't just sit back and look at Trevor Lawrence's stats and say, those numbers don't mean anything. You can't do it. You have to pay attention to the fact. I'll tell you a perception versus reality. I heard so much talk about Trevor Lawrence. I heard so much talk about guys like Lamar Jackson saying they ain't won nothing. They ain't won nothing. They ain't won nothing. And then I constantly hear people say that Justin Herbert is a top 5 quarterback. He ain't never won nothing either. Right? The perception that Justin Herbert is somehow in the same stratosphere or area where Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, I just don't get it. And I don't understand how what I don't get is how the people who use certain arguments for certain folks then don't apply those same arguments to other people. That's why we're in this quandary. I think the bottom line is most people just don't have a way of explaining things correctly. And then when they do stuff like that, it comes across as some sort of bias. It comes across as whether it's regional, whether it's familiarity bias. It could be a lot of different reasons why people think certain things. Trevor Lawrence does not have to be a top 5 quarterback in order to be a success. Trevor Lawrence doesn't have to be a top 5 quarterback to get a contract extension. Trevor Lawrence doesn't have to be a top 5 quarterback because that's what we thought he was going to be. Like he was going to be like this, like he's going to battle Patrick Mahomes for best in the league. And the story isn't written yet. He just might. Everybody has a different path and a different walk and a different way that they go about this stuff. How you perceive things are not necessarily the way that they are. And I do give credit to a lot of players that go, and I think a lot of the times with guys like Richard Sherman and all of those dudes, and I appreciate them. I do, because they actually have done things that I didn't do, and that they actually were on that field. They know what to look for. I don't think guys like that are just being absolutely biased. What I think guys are doing is they're allowing all of the hype to determine success or failure, and the hype didn't get picked. The player did. When you see success or failure, if you don't watch the game or if you're not here every single day to understand exactly what's going on, then when you try to come in just come in and go, well, this is all sometimes it is good to look at just the tape and not be all invested in it. And sometimes the tape can tell you certain things that people don't want to hear. And I think that there's some truth to that. There are things that he needs to do better. There are things that he needs to do that I didn't have any idea were going to be problems for him. But that doesn't mean he's a failure. That doesn't mean that he's not good. That doesn't mean that you give up on him. That doesn't mean, and this is what I told everybody a few weeks back about timing. Timing ain't going to wait for you. If it's his time to get a contract extension, you have to make that choice. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to make that choice before you're real comfortable having to make it. But that's the league that that's where we are. Quarterbacks are so hard to get. The truth about Trevor Lawrence is I think he's somewhere about 7 or 8. And the only time 7 or 8 is looked at as a bad thing is when you expected him to be number 1 or number 2, and that's all you were doing. You were back. You gotta wait and let these things play out. Too many times these days we dress our table and we set the course. It's like we write a script and we expect real life to actually emulate or actually copy that script to our satisfaction. And that is not the way that this works. This is competition. These are people that are out there playing every single day trying to get better. These are people, the results are going to vary. Some people's path isn't straight to superstardom. Some people's path is a little bit different than that. And we accept that in every other sport except football, except when it comes to quarterback play. It is the one thing that is, sometimes guys are put in positions too quickly, and then guys are snatched out of positions just as fast as they're put in there. Just ask Justin Fields. That's just the way it goes, man. When it comes to the quarterback position, perception is going to fight reality all the time, especially when it was about the highest of high expectations when it comes to a prospect that got all of this hype. And then because that person doesn't turn out to be quite as good as you're being hyped, anytime somebody says that, there are people that get defensive, and there are people that want to get angry, and there are people when the actual fact is some people are right. He may not be as good as the hype, but what the problem was the hype itself as opposed to him. It's not him. There's a whole bunch of things here, and there are a whole bunch of nuanced conversations that can be had to say why Trevor Lawrence isn't as good as people thought he was going to be. But the one thing that might be constant in all of this is how good everybody thought he was going to be was unrealistic from the very beginning. What's not unrealistic is OTAs. We'll tell you more about what we saw from OTAs, but I had to get this Trevor thing off my chest, man, because it was getting on my nerves. Yeah, give him his money. He deserves it. He's a good quarterback. I'm fine with the fact that he's the Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback now, and I'm fine with the fact that he's going to be their quarterback in the foreseeable future, because I do believe that he is tracking to be very, very good for a long, long time, and he has all of the intangibles. But what we have to do is just let it play out. That's all. Just let it play out and stop getting offended every time somebody points out the fact that, hey, man, y'all told me he was going to be there. I see that a lot right now with Caitlin. Best player in the world? No, she's not. Audra Wilson is. Most marketable player in the world? Sure. The example I gave yesterday, Serena beat Sharapova like 20 times. They played like 21, 22 times, and she was like 21-1 against her. Sharapova had more endorsements. More marketable doesn't mean best. I know some of us want that. That's not true. And that's a us problem. That ain't got nothing to do with the people that's out here competing on the field on these courts. That's all about humans. That's the stuff that I wanted to bring up today. Hey, man, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today. Locked On Sports Today has been launched by Locked On. It's the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Make sure you check out Locked On Jaguars, wherever you get your audio podcasts, and wherever if you want to see my face, go on YouTube to the Locked On Jaguars page. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and subscribe also wherever you listen to podcasts on the audio. Man, we'll be back tomorrow with more. We'll tell you about the OTAs and everything that happened at OTAs, and we'll do that here because Locked On Jaguars is your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen.